Good afternoon, everybody. Perhaps good early evening. No pressure, but the minister's coming, so I have received message. One of the disadvantages often of being tail end Charlie is all the ground has been covered, if you like, and everybody has covered what you were going to talk about. But I think on this occasion, in fact, it's an advantage because what I'm going to do is present to you the Hong Kong view, if you like, what we've learned in terms of regeneration. And as it happens, and I promise you I haven't altered a single slide, virtually everything that is going to come up is our topics and the issues that we picked up over the last 3 days. And David, congratulations on what I think has been a fantastic journey. I think we've all picked up a great deal. First of all, in terms of big picture, Hong Kong has reinvented itself 3 times in the last 50 years. So we're used to change, we're used to managing change. Change is, if you like, part of our DNA, and change is something in many ways that we welcome and we adapt to relatively easily. Competitiveness has been touched upon on a number of occasions over the last few days. Competitiveness is a given. You need competitiveness, obviously, if you're going to grow. But one word I haven't heard over the last few days is the word relevance. In Hong Kong, we strive not only to be competitive, but we strive to be relevant. And that may well be something that is on Sydney's agenda, but I haven't seen it mentioned, in fact, over the last few days. We also recognise and respect the collective memory. I mean, that again has come through as a theme, and it's something that is reflected in many of our initiatives and strategies. Livability, we strive to be a livable city. Quality of life is very much on our agenda. Major initiatives around energy, waste, water, air quality, and renewable energy. We live, as you know, in Hong Kong in a society of vertical communities, and just one takeaway, if you like, from this particular presentation, half our population live above the 16th floor. 3.5 million people in Hong Kong live above the 16th floor. Life, what is around those towers, the enjoyment, the relaxation they get, the camaraderie they get when they descend from their tower, clearly is very, very essential. And when you learn also that they live on an average of 47 square meters, that's the average size of a flat in Hong Kong in these large towers. Again, quality of life, livability is very essential. We also, like Sydney, believe we should capitalise on our unique characteristics. And one of our unique characteristics, such as it is with Sydney, is the harbour. Early days, this of course is the opium days, and we perhaps shouldn't talk too much or dwell too much on this. This is the very early days of Hong Kong. As we became a port, a trading port, particularly dealing up the Pearl River Delta, we began to develop along the waterfront. We began to trade across the Pacific and across up into India. So again, the port, historic connotations. This is all about the collective memory. Huge debate in Hong Kong when we wanted to move part of this structure. Young people particularly, and they got their way. Reclamation days, and I'll talk a bit about reclamation. There's been discussion about reclamation here. The community in Hong Kong actually stood up and said enough is enough, no more reclamation. And they took the government to court, won the day, and there's now an ordinance, a moratorium against any more reclamation in the harbour. The community in Hong Kong are very, very strong, and I'll explain to you why in a minute. And this is Hong Kong today. Many of you will recognise this as the shoreline. A lot of discussion around infrastructure. This is the backbone here in Hong Kong, the rail system. But again, just emphasising, to me, it's about a holistic solution. It's about all the elements that make up an integrated transport system, including transport on water. So this is only part of the picture. And I think when we're talking about transportation infrastructure, we do need to think and talk holistically. Just very quickly on the background, the reason I put this one up is just to give you an idea of density, because although we're 1,000 square kilometres, the bulk of the population lives on 24% of Hong Kong, which means we have a population of about 30,000 people per square kilometre in the urban area. Our backyard. What I haven't heard very much discussion about over the last few days is about the hinterland, because in our world we talk about city regions now. There's the city, but there isn't a physical boundary, if you like, around the city. The city spreads out, it flows out, it depends on its hinterland. This is Hong Kong's backyard, this is the Pearl River Delta, this is Guangdong province. 60 million people, which is a huge engine of growth, and because the boundary between Hong Kong and China is now very porous, this interflows on a daily basis. 70 million people cross the boundary every year, so that's give you an idea of the number of people who come and go. This is, again, background. Important, and the important point here is 97, one country, two systems. And the important point of that is that the two systems gave Hong Kong the security in terms of its future. Up until 1997, Hong Kong was very much like a transit camp, if you like. Everybody was on their way somewhere else, refugees from China, on their way to America or Australia, wherever they could find a new home. Most of the expatriates were on short-term contracts. Post-97, we began to get some certainty. And I just put this up. I don't know how many of you remember the famous Fortune article when they forecast the death of Hong Kong. They did retract. They did write another article a couple of years later, because in fact, what it did, it gave Hong Kong certainty, and the Hong Kong community, as a result, began to put down roots, develop some certainty about the future, develop ownership, and they have become a major, major force in terms of the planning and the direction of the city. You move ahead without the community at your peril, and this, I think, is very good. So they are heavily involved in all stages of the process, and I would encourage it in the case here too. Land utilisation, we've heard a little bit about low carbon footprints. We pride ourselves on our low carbon footprint. We'd like to do it better. We have a number of matrices like this which we use, and the one that I haven't heard a great deal about over the last couple of days is climate change. It's been touched upon. I mean, we take it very, very seriously in Hong Kong. This is a heat island study. This is looking at the heat that's generated by the urban areas. We find that in the dense urban areas, the temperature is 3 to 4 degrees higher than the surrounding suburban areas. And at night, the difference is even greater. So major issues around heat islands and ventilation of buildings, trying to respond to the challenges of the big picture, if you like, in terms of climate change. Again, urban growth. You heard at the presentation yesterday by the Mass Transit Railway. Our urban growth has largely been driven by infrastructure, which we have put in early in the piece. We may not have always got it in before the new towns or the urban development has taken place, but it's been done in parallel. It certainly hasn't followed. And I would advocate again, there are funding issues, there are planning issues, but I would certainly advocate taking an early step and an early decision on the infrastructure side of things. Integrated land use. This again is just illustrating how we come up with programs and plans which really drive the pattern of development in Hong Kong, and it is infrastructure driven. Right, rail-based development model. Again, we believe very strongly in the mixed-use concept. We believe that development nodes over stations, close to stations, or close to transport interchanges is probably a better way of putting it, make for an awful lot of sense, convenience, proximity to work, all these sort of things. Again, in certain locations in regeneration, this, I think, makes for a lot of sense. The average travel time in Hong Kong using public transport from destination to destination is 39 minutes. The mean travel time that anyone spends is 39 minutes. Urban mobility, walkability has been discussed. We plan in great detail about pedestrian separation. We landscape buffers between the road and the pedestrians. We believe that walking needs to be integrated as part of your urban mobility program. We're doing a lot of studies using the internet of vehicles, looking at internet of mobility, looking how we integrate the whole of the pedestrian and the transportation system. High capacity public transport. The result of having public transport to the extent that we do in Hong Kong is our car ownership. This is historic, but it's no more than 100 now. So 100 cars per 1,000 people is a measure in Hong Kong. That's a function of having the right public transport system. Brownfield sites, obviously, in the bays there are brownfield sites. We have focused on this in a major way because most of our industry has moved to China. Just a couple of takeaways here. Use of existing buildings. We had to persuade the building authority to come up with a special set of regulations to allow adaptive reuse within the existing structures. The existing building regulations applied to new build. It was very difficult to get them to come to the party, so we have a special set of regulations for adapting industrial buildings to commercial, and eventually it'll be also residential use. And then a lot of rezoning going on. Again, I would just throw this out to you. We believe the market is the best decider, particularly in terms of business use. So we have a zoning which is OUB, and the B is business, and that basically is anything of a commercial nature. And that will allow the market, if you like, to decide what is the appropriate allocation, if you like, or the appropriate subset, if you like, within the business sector, which it makes for best sense. And you might want to think of some flexibility within your zoning as you move things forward. Underground was touched upon in a talk we heard earlier. Not only putting, obviously, the railway underground, but putting car parks underground for sure. But we now are looking at a model where we try and put all the utilities underground as well. We found that utilities were taking between 15 and 18% of a very large site when you're looking at sewage, when you're looking at electricity, when you're looking at all the services provisions you needed. We now try and put as much of that in tunnel. It's accessible, obviously, if it is in tunnel, in hillside. This is something, again, you might want to think about as you move forward. Urban regeneration. We have an urban renewal authority, which is involved with both new build and with restoration of existing buildings. We decided in the end to create a special authority to drive urban regeneration. But we learned the painful way. We went urban renewal to begin with. These are urban renewal projects, and that is not what you want to achieve. Then the community quite rightly said, enough, enough. We want you to think in terms of revitalization, maintaining communities, trying to minimize the impact, if you like, of the work that you're doing. So we're now in revitalization and regeneration mode, and we're in a bottom-up model. We look to the community to come up with their ideas and identify the projects which they think will be suitable candidates for regeneration and revitalization. The only role that I think is useful when you have an authority which takes responsibility for regeneration is we have multiple title in Hong Kong. We have multiple ownership. You have strata title. I know you have it here in Australia too. You get stuck very often when you're trying to assemble titles. So our authority, if you get to 80%, you can knock on the door and say, will you help us acquire the remaining 20? A formula like that often will help free up situations which otherwise would be locked in. Arresting building decay, again, major program in Hong Kong. We have 40,000 buildings which are over 50 years old. Now, 50 years old in Hong Kong is a long time, and normally it would be gone. But we've now identified a whole range of buildings, 2,000, which are capable of being put into repair. We're making it mandatory now that every building is inspected every 5 years and a certificate issued. And then we help with grants and we help with the cost of doing the surveys. The complete redevelopment regeneration model, if you like, this is the ideal where you put the matrix together. You have the station, you have your shopping and office building, you have community facilities, then you have the open space along the river, you have your sports facility to the right, and you have your Heritage Museum to the left. So a real conscious effort, if you like, to put together a holistic solution. This is in one of the new towns. This is reclaimed land. This is essentially was marsh at one stage. Interconnectivity, this we think is very important, particularly where It's probably not necessarily an issue here in Sydney, but we do have adverse weather conditions on a regular basis. What we've done is to lift the pedestrian up to the first floor level throughout the central business district. This enables people to come and go freely in bad weather, in typhoons, etc. The only challenge is if by having lifted them up to the first floor, then there is potential weakness, if you like, at ground floor level in terms of the retail and the human scale. So there are some downsides, if you like, which need to be thought about. Heritage conservation, memory, collective memory. Fortunately, many of the old buildings in Hong Kong that remain, and I'm afraid there aren't many that remain, about 700 in total, are owned by the government. So there is the opportunity to systematically work with the private sector to restore these buildings. The model is basically find an NGO, encourage that NGO to decide on an appropriate adaptive reuse, and then work in partnership with that NGO to upgrade and refurbish the buildings. District parks and open spaces, very important. A lot of discussion last few days about open space. With our private developments now and our public housing estates, there is a minimum requirement of 40%, which has to be open space, landscaped open space. So a major uplift, if you like, in that requirement. Also within the retail sector now, we require the developers of shopping centres to provide public open space, usually on the deck, if you like, of the shopping centre, because they need to contribute as well in terms of public access. So major issue and a major attention to the open space issue. Placemaking, this has been touched on quite a bit. Again, working hard at district level to create activity nodes, be they entertainment, be they shopping, be they bars, etc., rather like the Mayor was describing earlier. Because this is the vibrancy you're looking to create, and you can only create it, quite frankly, by working in conjunction with the local district council and the local community. Planning with the people. This is the theme, of course, that's come through many, many times over the last couple of days. We engage every stage of the process. We engage even before we necessarily have decided where we think the opportunity might lie. We ask the community to come and discuss where they think the opportunity might lie, and let them be part of the visioning that we're talking about here today. So close liaison and interface with community. As a result of community involvement, the harbour, and particularly the waterfront, is now considered to be a community asset, if you like. It's 70% is owned by the government, so that of course is a community asset, or it's owned by the people anyway. But these are outcomes of community lobbying, pressure, and community partnership. So harbour planning principles and guidelines now, every development that is undertaken along the waterfront has to adhere to these guidelines. You've got schemes, planning schemes going on to enhance the waterfront, and you've got actual enhancement itself, which has been done in partnership with the district councils. There's discussion about reclamation, and I know Hong Kong is not a direct example, but I think I would caution, and I tell you why, because the government and Hong Kong have got themselves into quite a mix, if you like, over reclamation. This is what happened in Hong Kong over the last 100 years. Essentially reclaimed up to 40% of the waterfront, and clearly in today's world that was the concept of reclamation was becoming less and less acceptable, if you like. Government obviously did it to create land which they could build on and which they could sell. So there was a rationale when you were in growth mode, but you know, in today's more rational world, clearly questions were being asked. So community stood up and said enough's enough, and they pushed government to create draft a law, the Harbour Ordinance, which basically puts a moratorium on any further reclamation in the harbour, and the community, just to reinforce it, went to the High Court and got a definition of how any work that's required in the waterfront would be considered in the future. And basically the High Court has ruled you have to demonstrate overriding public need to even touch the waterfront. And you can imagine that is a very, very hard test. Because of the concern of the community about the waterfront, the government created the Harbourfront Commission, of which I'm the chair. And the role of the Commission is, as you see, to be the champion of the harbour and the harbourfront. So we do interface water and land. So the land-water interface is something that we look at very seriously. Be responsible for design and management and operation of the waterfront. And then this is something, again, which you may want to think about, but we're entrusted with devising and developing, if you like, public-private sector models, collaboration models, which might be appropriate for partnerships along the waterfront, because we believe, the Commission believes, the government believes that if you're going to bring the vibrancy, the life to the waterfront, you're going to have to tap the private sector. So what are the right business models? What are the right collaboration models? And the Commission is working on that now. The objectives, as you can see, a strategic plan, which is very much along the lines we've been talking here. Recognise the interdependence of land and water uses. Foster essential commercial, leisure and recreational. So we, like Sydney, have a working harbour. We also have a recreational harbour, dealing with that interface. And then deliver access, connectivity, because rather like with the bays, we have 73 kilometres of water around Victoria Harbour, much of which is inaccessible or difficult to access. So connectivity is a key priority. The shopping list of things that we're working on, first of all, Maritime Heritage Centre. This is again, these are just some ideas that we're looking at, back to collective memory, but also to Hong Kong's shipping history. And we're looking to create a major maritime heritage centre. I'll underline the word heritage. Rationalisation of working harbour. We, like Sydney, have a number of uses around the harbour, which in some ways are incompatible with what we're trying to do, but in many ways have to stay on the waterfront. And the best we feel we can do is to rationalise those uses and bring them, if you like, collect them in a way together. Some we've managed to move, but I think that at best, and I was listening to that conversation earlier, I think it is rationalisation, and probably one has to learn to live, if you like. And it's possible, I think, to turn some of these things into interest and attraction. Events and arena facilities, this is the recreational element. Until recently, our harbour was too polluted for people to fall in. You would have to have a stomach pump if you did. Now, the water quality has been improved by about 50%. We hold events. We have a cross-harbour swim now, 2,000 people. But that pollution was an issue, but is no longer. Pier revitalisation, again, I suspect this is something you want to discuss and think about. We have a total of 43 piers in the harbour. Only 7 are used for public transport purposes. The others largely are sitting there idle or being used on a casual basis. We have a major programme to turn them into community assets, using the roofs for cafes and viewing areas, and using the inner parts, if you like, the innards of the piers for commercial purposes. They're major assets, and in many cases, and I expect here, are rather lingering. Waterborne transport has been touched upon. We're looking at water taxis, a la New York, walk on, walk off. One of the challenges we have is because we've narrowed the harbour so much, it is and can be very choppy. So we're going to have fairly robust ferries. And marinas. That was an interesting point that someone raised earlier. Marinas in our world raise a lot of emotion. This privileged class who can own a very smart boat, etc. You know, why should they be allowed to have a special place, private place on our waterfront and use the water on an exclusive basis? So we're having to manage that quite closely. What we're doing is, with the operators we're talking to, is that the public provision will have to be much greater than the private provision, but we understand, accept the private provision probably is necessary to fund some of the public, but the emphasis will be on the public element. And this is just what we're hoping to achieve, and this is the Central and Wanchai waterfront. This is reclaimed now. We have the last line. There's no further extension, and this is at the moment is being. It's a construction site. The Central Wanchai bypass is being built, but within a year this will be handed back. Can you imagine, in greenfield form to the Commission, and we'll be able to start and build and do exactly what you see there. Greenfield site, no brownfield. Marvellous opportunity, and clearly opportunity to make a major statement. Kaitak, the site of the old runway, the runway and the old airport. These plans are quite well down the line now. The cruise terminal is here, and there are plans for a Kaitak fantasy at the end of the runway as well. Again, trying to create something special. Back to the Bays project. What we're trying to do here is create what we describe as a sustainable eco-community. I'm not sure I particularly like the word eco, but I'm sure you know where I am. It's all about smart, it's about green, it's about sustainability. We will be looking to badge all the buildings in the way that's been described, and create something very special, certainly on the peninsula, and aiming again for zero carbon. And then just West Kowloon. This is the West Kowloon development, which has got slightly distorted. Sorry about that. Michael Lynch was due to come but couldn't. This is our large cultural district, again on the waterfront, creating an area the size of Central Park here at the end of the peninsula, and creating a major stadium. And then there are 13 museums, theatres, and we have an opera house as well, but not as grand as yours. And this is all being funded by the public purse, and we're looking at completion probably by 2000. This is as long as the Bays. We're probably 2030 or beyond. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about yellow umbrellas because I think it is very important. I'm sure you're all aware of the troubles we're having in Hong Kong. These are the students. These are the people who feel unhappy. Now, I'm supposed to be talking about happiness, but just a note of caution, if you like, about unhappiness. There is a group of people in Hong Kong, and I suspect it's probably the same here in Sydney, who feel detached, that they feel they have no link, if you like, with the rest of the community, with the government. They don't trust government. We've had the word trust that's been spoken a lot of the time. And it started about electing the chief executive, but now it's much wider. Its whole series of unhappiness is around housing, affordability, quality of life, allowances, etc., education. 19,000 still out there 7 weeks later. So it's real. And I just caution because this model potentially is exportable. And there could be groups in other cities who would, because they're unhappy and because they've become detached and feel that they've lost their way, could well take similar action. So I think message is please connect, because we have, and unfortunately we still have a serious disconnect with a group of society, and it is around quality of life, and it is around social inequalities, if you like. We're negotiating, can you believe it now, with 16 groups? Within the 19,000 there are 16 groups, all with their individual agendas, all with their separate problems, if you like, and it's going to be very, very difficult to resolve. But I just thought I'd share that with you because it's something that I think we all should be concerned about. But thank you very much indeed. Thank you.